recorded.
So you've done 3 of these today. Well, now I'm messing up the recording. You've done 3 of these today, Lori. So I guess between the recordings, you can pick the best one.
That's right. And welcome, Melinda. It is good to see you as well. I am Lori Baker. I am with the Association for Individual Development, or AID, and we provide services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the far western suburbs. And we are here today to talk about a grant that we have had working with the Illinois Council on Developmental Disabilities around developing a toolkit to teach and support advocates in the community in creating 377 developmental disability boards in their community. So the name of our grant was a very clever name, Community Action for Referenda to Ensure Stability, or CARES. But basically what we're about is trying to help people in your individual communities access additional resources for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And there's a huge need. We have more than 20,000 children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities waiting for Medicaid services. Many thousands of them are actively seeking services at this point. We also have about 28,000 children receiving special education services who will be transitioning into the need for adult services over the next 10 years. And unfortunately, we have an active waiting list that those children who transition and turn 22, that they'll have to go on to in order to wait to receive services. Over the last 10 years or so, about 8,000 people or less have received approval for those PUNS list, those waiting list IDD services. And many of the people that are on the waiting list now are on the verge of crisis and don't have any safety net or support. And many community service providers have faced budgetary insecurity due to inconsistent funding sources, and of course, most recently due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has affected people's ability to have a steady stream of resources in order to meet the need and serve people. So a 377 board can help meet those challenges. And the most important thing that you learn this entire time is that the beautiful thing about the 377 Developmental Disabilities Board is that it is local money raised in a local community that goes to serve people that live in that community with intellectual and developmental disabilities. There's not many tax sources that you can say, I want my money to go to this particular thing. We just send it to the state government, we send it to the federal government, and it's out of our hands. But with these funds, you are assured that people in your community are going to receive the supports and services that they need, your friends, your neighbors, your loved ones. So what we're seeking to do with this information that we are providing is to educate and empower you as community members to come together and advocate for additional resources so that your friends, your loved ones are not left behind. So my computer keeps trying to restart. So hopefully it will stop. But as we continue to talk today, we are trying to help you get to the point where you have a reliable local source of funding. And we, with the assistance of ICDD and the grant that we have created tools and toolkit that you are able to use in order to come together with like-minded individuals in your community to advocate for the creation of a 377 Developmental Disabilities Board. As you know, there are thousands of people on the waiting list awaiting those important intellectual and developmental disability services. And it can take anywhere from 7 to 10 years or longer in order to be selected from off of that list and receive services. The goal right now underneath the latest consent decree is for that wait to be 5 years. But that still leaves a 5-year gap from the minute that you turn 22 until within 5 years you're selected off of the waiting list for service. And so that's part of what these resources can help fill, is that gap for people that have not been able to access Medicaid waiver developmental disability services. These folks are seeking all different kinds of supports, from transportation to occupational and behavioral therapy, job coaching, skill building, residential services, all the different things. And each person has their own unique needs that they are just kind of languishing on this waiting list, waiting to be met. When you look at what the process it takes in order to create a 377 developmental disability board in your community, here is kind of how the process works. You begin with a community group that comes together and begins to talk about how and where you might wish to create a 377 developmental disability board. Then you work on getting a referendum placed on an election ballot in your community and ask the voters of your community to vote yes in order to create a 377 developmental disabilities board in your community. Then if that referendum passes, you are able to begin to levy a tax. It's a real estate tax that goes on your real estate bill, and that money is collected and given to your community in order to create a plan and put together what needs there are in your community and how you might meet those needs with the revenue that is collected. That funding is targeted then to those critical needs and helps address the shortfall and provide those crucial services in your community. Again, one of the best parts of a 377 developmental disability board is that it ensures local control and planning, and that local resources stay to meet local needs in your community for your friends, your neighbors, and your loved ones. It gives a lot of flexibility to other that is not necessarily evidenced in Medicaid services or other services. And this whole project began because several years ago, a group of people came together, including AID and ICDD, and many of you that are participating in these webinars, and advocated for the legislation that governs 377 board development to expand and include the ability to create a 377 developmental disabilities board at not only the county level, but also at the township or city or village level. And this was important because other types of funding entities like 708 mental health boards were able to be created at every level. But at the time, 377 boards could only be developed at the county level. When you think about opposition and being able to convince people of the need, sometimes a smaller area makes that easier to do across a community. So after that legislation passed, ICDD said, we really want to create a toolkit for people to be able to know what the step-by-step process is in order to create a 377 Developmental Disability Board. And that is how all of these resources came about. So when a 377 board is established via referendum at that county, township, or village city level, after the referendum is placed on the ballot, and if it is successfully passed, then at a minimum 3-person board is appointed by the county board, township supervisor, or the mayor to administer the funds that are collected. The county clerk or the township then collects those levied resources, and the 3-person or greater appointed board puts together a needs assessment for the community, a plan for how they are going to meet those needs, and then puts together an application process for not-for-profits and other service providers to be able to apply for funding provided by the levied amount of funds coming from the real estate tax in order to meet the needs of people that are not currently being served. That board then also is responsible for overseeing those grants that are given out to ensure that the services are delivered and that they're meeting the needs of the people in the community. And this happens every year as the tax is collected and provided to the 377 Developmental Disabilities Board. So no one likes to talk about a tax increase. No one likes to raise their hand and say, yes, I would like to pay more taxes. But this is a very minimal tax that does not cost very much at all. So the cost is capped at 0.1% of assessed property value. So for example, if you have a house that is valued at $100,000, the maximum costs would be $2.75 per month or $33 per year. That's less than the latte that you buy every day at Starbucks, just once a month, right? In order to deliver services to your friends and neighbors in need. Now, if you had a home that was valued at $300,000, that would have a maximum cost of $8.33 per month or $100 per year. I can't imagine any of my friends and neighbors who wouldn't be willing to donate between $30 and $100 per year to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in our neighborhoods who need support and services. It's a very minimal investment, a small ask that combined together with everyone's money adds up to a big change for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in your community. Now, the first step towards putting together a 377 referendum is to begin to create an identity for your movement. So coming up with a name that portrays what it is that you're trying to do with this coalition or group, such as Smith County Cares or Jonesville Citizens for Funding Fairness. Creating a name that talks about our community. This is a community that we are seeking to serve. It talks about fairness and our common effort, all of us working together to make something happen. You obviously want to stay away from anything in your name that can be construed as offensive or divisive. And it's a good tip to think about finding people in your community who can tell their story, either through documents that are printed or at a community meeting, or even going door to door, so that people can see and understand how important this funding is. And it gives a personal touch and touches people's hearts. When you think about it, I think most citizens believe that people with disabilities are supported in their communities, and they don't realize that there's a long waiting list and not enough resources provided by our state government in order to ensure that all people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have the supports and services that they need. Then your next step is to branch out and look for other people to join your coalition. You might want to talk to other parents and guardians, consumers at your workplace or at your service location, school and community groups, your faith community, different neighborhood groups. You would want to begin to share the story and stress how important it is for your city, your township, your county to have fair funding for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. You want to look for partners that might have experienced similar situations as people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So many other populations, like the aging population, people with a mental health diagnosis, children with physical health needs, have seen inadequate resources and elimination of services that are vital to them, and can be partners with you in raising the boat so that together you can advocate for adequate resources for the community. Some other places that you can look for like-minded individuals are places like the League of Women Voters, who is very engaged and interested in services for people with disabilities and affordable housing. Police and fire, first responders organizations, service organizations like Lions Club or the Knights of Columbus, whose mission is to raise funds for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. These are some really good non-traditional partners that you can seek to bring into your coalition. And then you need to begin thinking about how you tell the story. One of the great things about this project is that it has helped us develop some resources that all people can use and have access to. At the website 377cares.org, there are materials such as a generic door hanger that you can add in information about your community that is available in both Spanish and English. There's a postcard in Spanish and English that you can tailor to your community. We have a manual that is in Spanish, English, and pictorial representation so that all people, as they are able to communicate, are able to use the resource in order to tell the story of the need in your community. Also available at the website are information about people who are on waiting lists, the length of wait, what the State Board of Elections. There's information about the trade association, ACMI, which is where 377 boards are members, so you can find out information about currently existing boards, and there's all kinds of other resources. This webinar will be there as a recording, as well as the PowerPoint itself, and we will continue to add resources and update resources onto the website as we continue with this project. Your next step might be to consider whether you need any budget for your coalition. There are coalitions that have done this with zero budget, with different members doing the work that they can. Like, for example, AID might print some of the door hangers for everyone to use, or someone else in the community might have access to other resources that they can bring to bear. But a campaign that we were a part of decided that we did need to raise raise money, and we came together and created some restaurant fundraisers where we invited people in, and we gave information and talked about the need for a 377 developmental disability board in our community, and then charged people. They got to eat pizza and have soda pop, but we also got part of the money back into our coffers as a fundraiser, and we're able to purchase yard signs, both small, and we got some really giant ones that go on those big stakes, and we're able to put signs out in order to remind people to vote yes for the referendum when it was on the ballot. So you'll have to think about that in your community and what would be the best and most important thing for you to do in that respect. Now, I'd like to share the information about what the referendum ballot question says. This is straight out of the 377 Developmental Disability Board legislation. And it talks about shall the city, county, or township levy an annual tax of not to exceed 0.1% for persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. This is important to share with people because it's kind of confusing language that can be complicated, and you're not quite sure whether you should vote yes or no. And what we're asking people to do is vote yes, we want to levy this annual tax. Now, right now, there is some legal actions going on around the language that is in the legislation. So we're keeping abreast of what is going on, and we'll post on the 377cares.org website what happens with the legal court case, and if there needs to be any change in this language. There's also some potential legislation being proposed to fix the language issue, and if anything happens with that, we will immediately post it on our 377 website. But this is the referendum language that all 377 boards in Illinois have used on their ballot in order to have a 377 board created in their community. There are two different ways that you can get the referendum onto a ballot. The first way is to go directly to your county board, your township, or your city council and ask them to place a referendum onto the next election's ballot. If you or anyone in your coalition has good relationships with that county board or your township or your city council, this might be a really good way, and it's an easier way to get the 377 referendum onto the ballot. You could have community meetings with them and talk about the information about why there is a huge need in your community, and ask them to be able to put this onto the ballot. You have to remember that they are elected officials, and so they may not want to put a tax increase onto the ballot. They might think that they would look bad. So then there's a second way that you can get this referendum onto the ballot, and that's the petition route. This is a longer process, and it's a little more challenging, but it's a way to get around any elected officials that might not wish or choose to put this on an election ballot. The petition process allows for you to ask registered voters in your community to sign a petition asking for the referendum to be placed onto the next election's ballot. It is a little bit harder, right? Because you're going to have to collect a certain amount of petition and a certain amount of signatures, but it also plays a double role in that you can educate your community about the need for a 377 Developmental Disabilities Board in your city, township, or county as you are asking them to sign the petition to get the referendum on. And so then hopefully they will vote yes because they're educated about the need for it as they sign your petition. There are detailed instructions within the manual about how to go about the petition process, the requirements, and all the pieces that go with that. So I'm not going to go through those individually, but I want to remind you that a petition is actually a legal document. So you want to make sure that you handle it in the ways that are prescribed within your county, city, or township. And oftentimes it's good to have an election attorney prepare, review, and bind your petitions in order to have them submitted. We personally, I was involved with a campaign where our signatures were challenged, and they said, we don't believe all those people really are registered voters in the city of Elgin. And people went through the rolls and they went through our petitions, and we did not have enough signatures to meet the threshold requirement because some of those signatures were thrown out. So the next time that we went back, because we did not let it stop us, we had learned from our mistake, and our goal was to get twice as many signatures as we needed in order to cushion in case anybody challenged our signatures. And we were able then to get the referendum onto the ballot. There are requirements about when you can circulate petitions for signature and when you have to turn those signature petitions in by. And so you want to make sure that you are looking at the information that's in the CARES manual, as well as the Illinois State Board of Elections that posts all the information about when petitions can be circulated, what date they start, and what date that they finish, and you have to have the petitions submitted by in order to get the referendum onto the ballot. Again, this is not a huge amount of money, right? That's your selling point. You spend more per month on your lattes than this will cost you. It's a very small price to pay in order to help your friends, your neighbors, your loved ones be able to access the services and supports that they need to live successfully in the community. The other piece about this that is a selling point for any background, right? Whether you are a Democrat or Republican, this is not a partisan issue. The idea of being able to keep your tax dollars in your home base area, whether that's the county, the city, or the township, and make those local decisions about serving your local people is very attractive to people, right? This is something that even the most conservative person can say that they would agree with, is being able to decide in your community where your needs are and being able to meet those needs with your local money. Your county clerk's office is going to be a really good resource for you, and you'll be able to get from them your local assessed valuation of property in whichever area you choose to try to pass your referendum. So whether that's the county, a township, or a city or village, you can go to your county clerk's office and ask for the local assessed valuation of property in that area. This is public record information, and they have to provide that to you. That will help you to figure out how much the cost is going to be in your area for the people that will have the assessed tax added. Every area has their own average assessed value. So the numbers that we are giving you are general numbers it's going to be around, but it will change slightly up and down depending upon what your local average assessed value is. If you're thinking to yourself, this is exciting, I'm interested in doing this, when do I start? You start today. As soon as you are engaged and interested, you can begin to put together the idea and the possibility in your community, right? Because there's a lot of different steps to take, and it takes time to be able to do that. You have to build your coalition. You have to bring on others. You have to decide what community area you're going to target. Do you want to do a township? Do you want to do a city or village? Do you want to try for the entire county? What election cycle do we want to try to put the referendum on the ballot? This is a undertaking that takes a little bit of time and is about building relationships among your community members. And so the time to start is as soon as you're, strike while the iron is hot, as they say, right? If you're getting excited about this, now's the time to start. And that State Board of Elections website is going to be, really helpful, as I said earlier, in terms of giving you information about when a petition has to be circulated, what timeframes that starts, and what timeframe it ends. And we do have links to that from the CARES website, so you'll be able to get to it. Now, one of the questions about spending money on election is whether or not you need to file with the Illinois State Board of Elections. Indeed, the group of organizations that I worked with on the Elgin's Township referendum, we did indeed create a political action committee whose sole purpose was to spend money on encouraging the adoption of a referendum, right? A 377 Developmental Disability referendum. But if you don't spend more than $5,000 on influencing an election, which is what asking people to vote for a referendum is, you don't have to file for the Illinois State Board of Elections. It's a decision. That's why you need to think about how or whether you raise money or how you do that. I will tell you that it was very easy to do online yourself. We didn't use a lawyer to do it. And once the referendum passed, we dissolved it, and you just went in and filled out your forms that you had spent X amount of dollars on encouraging people to vote yes for the 377 DD board, and you spent it on yard signs and billboards and postcards and mailing. And then you dissolve and said, we are no longer, since it passed, we're no longer a political action committee, and filled out the dissolution paperwork. But if you have access to an election lawyer, and there are many lawyers that often do pro bono work, you can also ask the election lawyer how you should proceed and what you should do, and they could also help you. Don't let it scare you too much. It was super duper easy, like we did it ourselves. How many signatures does it take to get your referendum on the ballot? That varies in every jurisdiction because it's based on the top vote getter in the previous election. So that's another thing that you can ask your county clerk about, who is the election responsible for managing the election. And they will know that in the last election, the top vote getter received 1,000 votes. And they will tell you what percentage of 1,000 you need to get in signatures in order to get a referendum onto the next election's ballot. And like I said earlier, it's always good to try to have a goal to get at least twice the number of signatures that you need, just in case, because people will oftentimes forget, oh, I live in Naperville, but I work in Aurora, so I can sign this Aurora about signature ballot, and they can't because they're not registered in Aurora, and Aurora is where it is happening. So it's a good goal, and we learned the hard way, so don't learn the hard way, that some of your signatures could be thrown off and not counted towards your goal. So the goal is to get much more signatures than what you have to have. It can be intimidating to think about going door to door, asking people to sign a petition in order to get a referendum on, and will people open the door, and how will they respond? So you should think about ways you can get to a large amount of people in a short amount of time. And those are in like your public venues, places like farmers markets, libraries, train stations, grocery stores, school events, but you need to make sure that you have permission from the entity that you are seeking to be at. So if it's at a grocery store, you need to ask them if you can ask people coming into the property if they would sign your petition. But that's a good way to get at a larger group of people and not be as scary, maybe, as going door to door and knocking on people's doors in a neighborhood. Both can get you signatures, right? But maybe you can do a combination of both as well, depending upon what you're comfortable with. 377 developmental disability funding is generally spent for people who are not currently receiving Medicaid services already. So those people, like I talked about earlier, that might be in that gap where they have transitioned from special education services when they turn 22 and have not yet been selected from the waiting list in order to receive adult services. It can also be used to pay for things Medicaid won't pay for. Oftentimes, we find people trying out innovative programming and practices that maybe eventually you might want to then ask for Medicaid to approve as a service, and you've got it proven already by having been delivered, by 377 funds. It can meet a need that isn't currently being met in your community, right? And assist people, let's say, who perhaps might not have documentation or might not be able to access insurance for some reason. There's a ton of different ways that 377 funding can assist your community members with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And that's the great thing about it. Local money for local needs, assisting local people. Again, there are lots of different resources that are available on the website at 377cares.org. And this is kind of like a living, breathing website. It's not going to remain the same. So we'll put up information about what happens with the court case around the referendum language. We'll put up updated information and materials as we are able to do those. If another community area, let's say, translates into a different language, we'll be happy to put those resources up on the website as well. And so continue to go back to the website. We'll add links to other sites like that State Board of Elections, like the county clerk links, if we can get those for all the counties, and other information that you find useful. There's a contact link at the top of the webpage. And if you have ideas of something you don't see there that you would like to see as a resource, please contact us through the contact link, and we'll look at how we can come up with that resource or link to a page that has that. We want to thank the Illinois Council on Developmental Disabilities for their partnership in funding the development of the 377 CARES Toolkit, this webinar, and in supporting the passage of the legislation that made it possible for 377 developmental disability boards to be created at the county, township, or city or village level. We're really excited and always happy to be a partner with ICDD, and would be happy to answer any questions that you have. This is really kind of an overview of the process. The manual is much more in depth with step-by-step processes so that you can look at it. Again, the manual is really nicely set up in that it has pictorial representations at each level. So, our original goal was to have teams of perhaps a parent or guardian and a person with a disability being able to present to their community, and they could still use these resources in order to do that. I think that there's a lot of information there, and that hopefully people will be encouraged and excited about trying to develop some 377 developmental disability boards in places where they don't exist around the state. Are there any questions from anyone?
I have a few, Lori. Anybody else talking?
Certainly. I couldn't tell who started, Melinda or Joan.
Both. So Melinda, go first.
No, actually, I didn't have a question. I just turned my video back on.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, go, Joan.
Okay, so in communities, townships, villages that you've had some initial success, or that DD boards are present, this determination of sticking to a village or a township, how do groups make this
Decide.
Yeah. Give me, is it, like if you have a town of 30,000, the chances of distributing a healthy amount of sums won't cut it. I mean, once you figure
right. That should probably be some of the consideration, right? What might work. And so, like, for example, we tried here about 10 years ago in Kane County to do a countywide 377 Developmental Disabilities Board, and it did not pass, but it passed in Aurora and Elgin, but the center of the county voted it down, and so we didn't get one. And that's when our previous president and CEO began looking at, let's change the legislation so we can go to a township or a municipality. So if you live somewhere, like I know DuPage has really been working on 708 mental health boards by township, because there's enough people and enough real estate at each township in order to bring things together. In some of the more rural areas, it might make more sense to do a countywide initiative in order to have a larger pool of money that comes together. I think it also depends upon how, if you think there are pockets of resistance, or might be pockets of resistance based on the makeup of the area, and trying to ask some questions around that, to see if it's strategic to choose somewhere that is perhaps smaller and you might be able to have more influence on. There's also a lot of I've heard a lot of conversation about what election you try to put the referendum on. Do you do it on a national election time where people have a big turnout, or do you do it on one of the small elections where there's 500 people that turn out, and then you only need, the 60% of the, 500 people that turn out to win? And I've seen I've seen different referendums pass in both cases. So some people will say, oh, you need to do it on a presidential election. And some people will say, no, do it on, one of your municipal election cycles. So that's other strategy. Melinda?
Okay.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, finish.
No, I just was curious, do people poll, like in reality, how many people, not just compassionate people, but people who have disabilities that live in certain areas and think, well, our special ed district in this area, that getting information from the co-op to say, where do most of these people live? Like to make some of these decisions more fruitful.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, because our co-op goes over several townships. But okay, go ahead.
Melinda?
I had a quick question. You said that this referendum did pass in Elgin, and the 377 would be used for people who are not already funded. How would a person with a disability actually access any of that funding?
Yeah, and so Elgin's a complicated case because it was actually a 708 mental health board that passed, which can pay for mental health, developmental disabilities, and substance use services. And normally how a person would be funded is that a provider, a social service agency would apply to the 377 board and say, in our application, we want to serve 20 people that don't have funding. And then, we would seek out, like, let's say it was AID, then we would seek out 20 people that don't currently have funding and be able to pay for services like community day services, residential respite, or whatever other services that person might desire to have.
Once this passes, let's just say in Elgin it passed, how are the people of Elgin notified that this is even available to them?
That's a good question. So, I think traditionally things have been advertised, in ways to maybe people you have are like, for example, we as a service provider have a waiting list of people that are waiting for service here at AID. And if we get access to resources that might help pay for services for them, we would reach out to people on our waiting list. So I think oftentimes that it may not always go to, I'm just being totally frank here, it may not always go to people that haven't heard about it, right? Because there are so many people that don't have service and that access it. But I can see, and what I hope would happen with these resources is that it would be a coalition of people that included service providers and people in need of services so that they could work out together, like if this passes, how are we going to bring in the people that help pass this referendum and ensure that they have access to some of these funds? Kim, you wanted to say something?
Yes. Hi, everybody. I am lucky enough to work for the Illinois Council on Developmental Disabilities, and my colleague Marielle is here with us as well tonight. So hi. And Melinda, I wanted to share with you a conversation that resonated with me. I had it just 2 hours ago. My aunt called me because she got a notification on Facebook about this training today. And so great. And she said, all right, and she lives in Mahomet, Illinois. And she said, and actually longer story, but she's a parent of a person with a developmental disability. And she knows she has some friends in the area and whatever. And she said, we need this in Mahomet. And I said, babe, you have one in Champaign County. You've had it for years. And she had no idea, nor did any of the families that live in Mahomet know that in their county, but it was in the city of Champaign that this existed. And I said, so that's when we started talking about, that's where you need to go to these board meetings, get some families interested and understand that some counties have had these for decades even, and not everyone knows about them because they've been maybe, I don't know, funding the same thing year after year for a long time, or they've just gotten used to some routines, or they haven't diversified how they're getting some of their announcements out, or they don't have a ton of money to spare. So then that's why it doesn't spread out. So there really seems to be a lot of different reasons why people don't know. I would say in general, it feels as though this is not something that's regularly advertised. And the council funds a lot of things as well. And sometimes we're surprised that people don't always know that we're trying to fund things. It's interesting in that. So I'm wondering too that, if people even know if they already exist where you live.
How long has the 377 been around? You say that this county has been funded for 10 years or more.
Yeah.
This with a 377. So this is not new.
No, I actually don't know how long they've been in existence.
Okay.
Like this, I want to say late 90s, maybe 60s. I don't know. There's some that are, so they started out with 708s and then they added in 377s. And then there's a couple of other numbers, which I can't remember. So they've been around for a long while, and many of them began at the very beginning, right? Like when they first were legislated, and then everybody was like, whoa, wait a minute, stop. We don't want to pay any more taxes, right? We don't want to pay any more real estate taxes. And they kind of stagnated for a while. So I think that part of this is to try to move some of that forward, but I do agree with Kim. There are less 377s than there are 708s, and if it's not on there right now, I am making sure that it gets on there tomorrow on the website. The link to the ACMI website, which is the Association of Community Mental Health Authorities in Illinois. Oh, I got it right this time, but it's like yeah, anyway, ACMI is what they call it for short. And that's a trade association for people that these 377, 708, 530 boards, and they have like a map, that shows where the different boards are in the different counties, so you can look at it. There are much fewer 377 boards in the county and across the communities. So, it really is ripe. But I think that Kim is correct in that we, part of this movement can be how do families and providers go together to ensure that, it's created and the funds are created, but then they're used in a way that is of most benefit to all people.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just curious, is this information known through past agents? Because there's, as you said, there's people on the waiting list, and I work with Service Inc. And I was just curious, are they very well aware of this? Because I really didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if, I would assume that some of them know of the resources. I think that many ISC agencies know that providers are raising funds everywhere, right? And we apply to all kinds of places to be able to deliver services, both to people who don't have funding, but also because it costs more than what we get paid to deliver the service, And so I think that's part of the challenge as well, is that sometimes some of these resources might fill in gaps, right? That and doesn't really increase the amount of people receiving funding funding or services. This is not a perfect catch-all, fix-all, right? But it's just another way to try to get some more resources into a very resource scarce system. And the more that we can get, the more people, that can have access to service and supports. And in those places that do have these 377 boards, it is vital. They're public meetings. They have to put out an agenda. They have to put out the meeting notice. Any public person has to be able to attend, and you have to be able to give public comment. If a whole bunch of people start showing up somewhere that has always given to the same people and a whole town of people don't know about it, then, I imagine that they might shake up their decision-making over the course of time as local community members who pay into the tax, pay into the fund, advocate at those meetings.
Would this
One
be
of
like,
the benefits of this awareness is that we do know, I know personally of a mom who lives in the Quincy area who realized that there was a board. She'd never heard of it, really active and works in the field and as a mom, all of it. Really well educated, great advocate, didn't know. And I believe now she might be the vice president or is now has just inserted herself in where this funding comes from. It's taken her a couple of years to break it down, and she really ruffled a lot of feathers, but now she has a formal position. So I just think it's interesting. There is obviously like a government-esque obvious aspect to this. Clearly it's governmental, it's political, it's whatever. And so there's that level of, sort of continuous advocacy that's needed there to kind of break through. But we're getting there. And plus I would say, Julie, welcome to the beginning of the public awareness campaign. I feel like this is one of those situations where this information is absolutely vital to some communities and some families that would really want to take it. And yet we're still trying to get people to be aware. So we're starting that. And, the council's committed to making sure that we are at least able to advertise the website, the webinars, et cetera, to make sure that more and more people learn about these opportunities. It's a systems change process, right? It takes a while to get these things established. And so the more people that know, the more it generates, and, hopefully some big changes can come to some communities.
Probably one of the other things that we should look at is there are a lot more 708 mental health boards that can fund mental health, developmental disabilities, and substance use. And I would bet that many of them are not using their funds, or using very few for developmental disability services. So that's another, place you can insert yourself in those communities.
I have another quick question? I'm sorry. So the people that are on these boards now, I think I heard you say if the board actually comes about, who actually assigns them or appoints them?
Yeah, it depends upon where it was. So if it's a county, it's the county board chair. If it's a city, it's the mayor, city or village. If it's the township, it'd be like the township supervisor and the town council, township council.
And have you found that from the ones that are they people that are aware of the issues?
So there's prescription within the legislation that talks about who you need to be, what the board needs to be made up of, who it needs to be representational of, and some specifics about that. So like on the 708 board, it's like 7 members, and it's a minimum of 3 on the DD board. So, you have less chance for representation, but you can always have more board members than are required. You just have to have at least 3, but sometimes they, I've heard of, county boards or townships appointing their own township board members, and just managing it, which isn't always, I don't think, probably the best.
when you're about going to these meetings, what are these meetings? Where is this, like a township meeting?
It would be the board, the 377 board meeting or the 708 board meeting in the communities that have them already. I don't know where you're from, but
I'm in Streamwood, but I'm again, how would I know if my area had a 377 board?
so that's that OCMI website that I was talking about earlier that could really potentially be a resource, and we'll make sure that it's linked on the website so that you can see the map. I'm sitting here looking at it up on my board, and I'm trying to think. I don't think Streamwood has one. There are a variety of townships in Cook and DuPage that have 708 boards, but I'm not seeing.
Hanover Township.
Pardon me?
I think it's Hanover Township.
Hanover. Hanover Township does have a 708 board, and I can send you information about it and when it meets, because they're one of our funders. So well, if you want to send me an email so that I can respond and give you that information, Melinda. It's L Baker, LBAKER.
Mm-hmm.
At AID cares, there you go, .org, and Kim just put it in the chat as well.
Okay.
And you can click on it and open it up, but I can send you the name of the person who is the director of the 708.
Melinda, I used to attend 708 or 708 board meetings when I used to have a job at a provider agency in Evanston before all of this, and we were funded in part by them. So there were, I don't know if it was monthly or quarterly, and they were in the Evanston Public Library, and they were always at night, and it was always cold, and we were always tired and always begging for money. But that's where they happened. So usually it's at your libraries or your other, municipal buildings. A real hot spot for for folks. Usually like 7 o'clock at night, and we're all tired, but we're there, trying to do good work. So. Kind of like this.
Would it be beneficial? You said that this website is the 377cares.org. Would it be beneficial to list what townships, counties, villages, whatever?
Yeah, I think we'll make sure that we link to the map on the OCMI website, because they'll keep it up to date, and that way we won't get behind on if any new ones get added, because people are working on this. Like I said, I know personally one gentleman who is going to get every township in DuPage if it's the last thing that he does, right? And he's pretty awesome about it. They are passing them. Milton Township just passed in the last election. So, and by the way, looked like it was losing when you went to bed at night. And after they counted the mail-in votes, it won. So they're in the process of bringing. So you never know what's going to happen. So it's very exciting. Kim asked,
I just wanted to clarify. So, any person with a developmental disability essentially could benefit from this funding. You don't have to be on the PUNS list, off the PUNS list. You don't have to be selected for services. You don't have to be receiving Medicaid. You don't have to, it's not the same sort of criteria that we're used to with our Medicaid provided services. And so they really can just go openly. You don't have to meet a certain criteria. It's really just who applies for the funding and gets it, and who do they serve, and that's who benefits.
And in general, you know, it's just can't, it's not going to supplant Medicaid. So, you know, if somebody has Medicaid, it's not going to be able to pay for anything that Medicaid would be able to pay for, and you wouldn't want it to, right? You wanted to go for services that Medicaid won't pay for, or to somebody who doesn't have Medicaid.
I just have one question. I know I'm conscious of the time, but I'm curious about the matchup between a provider that lives in an area that has a 377 board and an individual seeking funding for something that's not paid for by their Medicaid service. Do those things have to be a match? Like, or let's say I live in a township that has one, but where I need to get the service is outside of that. Tell me how that works.
So in general, the times that I have presented to any kind of board like this, 708 or 377, they want to ensure that the funds are going to their residents in need, right? Because that is what the funding is for. It's raised out of their community for their residents. Doesn't necessarily mean that the provider has to reside in that township, but the person who is receiving the service needs to be a resident of the community.
I thought I heard you say something about providers can apply to provide services. So I just wondered, was I hearing that correctly? And how do they need to be?
Yeah, so, you know, I mean, AID does not have a facility or building in Hanover Township, but we serve people from Hanover Township with intellectual and developmental disabilities and behavioral health diagnoses. So we spend that money on those people, not on people that reside in Elgin Township or Aurora Township.
That helps a provider immensely. You know, they can't be everywhere. So if they really care about their individuals they serve, it's targets directly to them, right?
It's just another resource, and you got to get as many resources together as you possibly can, right? I mean, that's all we're all trying to do is get enough resources to meet the need.
Are you reaching out to providers that are hurting for funds to be able to do the things they need to do for, I mean, I would think if you could, you know, round those people up too.
So the next webinar that I'm hoping to give in Wheeling Township that is working on a 708 board is geared towards providers to non-for-profits about why they should be involved. So
thanks.
You say that
my spare time.
After 7 on a weeknight.
Is there an age requirement? I mean, for the person with the disability to even apply for these funds? I mean, can you be 4 years old, 12 years old?
So there doesn't have to be an age requirement. It's really much more flexible. So I don't know if you remember that slide that was earlier. Some places there isn't any screening process for 0 to 3-year-olds in order to try to catch developmental delays, right? And so sometimes, you know, that is a service that is purchased, you know, through a 377 Developmental Disability Board. And that's just one example of, you know, what one area has done and decided when they looked at the needs in their community. I mean, that's the point of this board, right? You're supposed to look at the needs of your community and decide where the gaps and barriers are, right, and try to fill those with this funding to the best of their ability. And that
funding that we used to. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
No, I said the puppy was adorable.
I know the puppy is adorable.
That's my mom's dog.
The funding that we used to apply for sometimes had a specific angle. And so there were certain times that the 708 board was interested in transition age youth, or there was a certain time that they were interested in like some kind of specific sector. So I think, I don't exactly know how they run, but I know that there's probably some level of like need assessment, and then they can either tailor what they want to intervene on, or they could maybe make it more broad. So I really think it comes down to probably the board and the input they're getting.
Mm-hmm. Yep, they are required to do a planning process and at least a formal process, at least I think every 3 years in order to like do an assessment. And oftentimes, even when I was in central Illinois, they would bring, everybody, families, consumers, providers all together, for a big day-long event. And you'd break up into different rooms to talk about different things that were happening in the community and where new needs were bubbling up or where things were changing. It's like, oh no, we don't need transportation anymore. We got a bus system now. So now we need, whatever. So that they can compile all that stuff. And it's required that they do that as a board ongoing and then incorporate that into their pieces. So Theo has to go to bed. So Kimberly is going. And I am going to say goodbye to you ladies as well. I thank you very much for coming on a weeknight at 7 p.m. To be able to talk about this. Check out the website and let me know if there are other resources that you think would be good to be on there.
Thank you, Lori.
ladies.